This is Open Source Tonight for Wednesday, November 27th, 2019. I'm Vincent Maggard, your host, with my co-host Billy Everso in studio.
Thank you, everybody. I'm here with Vincent.
That is correct, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to Open Source Tonight. This is the show where we talk about the latest in open source software and news. And today, we've got a bunch of cool stories coming up for you. And then later in the show, our topic for this week's episode is Linux Mint. Billy considering using it and where that's going to go, possibly. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe next week we'll be installing it on his machine and he'll be officially a Linux user.
Hopefully it'll make my computer run a lot better, hopefully.
Well, obviously that's going to happen. Linux will make anything run better, which we have a story on later. Again, a good tease. But before we get into that, Billy, how have you been doing this week?
I'm good. I'm tired. I'm sleepy.
Same here. Same here. So let's get right into the story here. The first story here as the sun begins to set. The Linux kernel 5.4 was released. And let's talk about that. So, what was so special about the Linux kernel release? Billy adjusting his mic there. Sorry, I just had to acknowledge that. Probably no one noticed it until I said that. Linux Mint 4 changes include faster large directory modifications on XFS, the file system stuff, which I don't even use, but hey, if you use it, you know.
You use it.
Yeah, exactly. XFAT drivers are now in staging.
Virtio FS merge.
I know how to pronounce it normally, but I can't. Yeah. VirtIO FS. That's my brain. That's what my brain's telling me to pronounce it as. Has now added improved virtual machine folder sharing. AMD Ryzen 3000 CPU temperature reporting has been added to the kernel. Support for RTL 8125 network devices. VP8 decoding has been added to the kernel. That's really good. That will probably make video playback easier on the web because YouTube, for example, uses that a lot, especially in Chrome.
So it'll make it more smoother?
Probably. Continuing on here, server management processor A-Speed ATSC 2600 support has been added. Support for Intel Ice Link Thunderbolt has been added. Power management tweaks for the Intel Thermal TTC offset has been added. Some of this stuff I've never heard of. So
I'm just wondering why they get the names for it.
If any of this applies to you, congratulations on it applying to you.
Yes, congratulations.
For the rest of us that don't even care, we don't care. Sound open firmware improvements have been added to the kernel. Among other things, devices that, quote, now just work, meaning they have proper driver support and everything, include Logitech G700 series receivers. I think that's for like keyboards or headsets or something. Logitech Lightspeed receiver, Creative something IR receivers, SmartTech touchscreen panels, some TV tuner, Magic Crack guy or something.
T230C TV tuner.
Yeah. Anyways, but that's just some of the things that are going on. So, yeah, I mean, I really didn't feel like there was nothing there that was worth really like sitting there and talking about for 10 years, Billy. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but
yeah.
None of that stuff like really was like, I mean, other than the Thunderbolt thing, I don't really see anything of note that most normal users are going to care about. I could be wrong, but
I understand a little of it. That's what I'm here for, to learn.
Well, learn you will.
Learn with the viewers, learn with the listeners as well.
Yes. But yeah, considering it doesn't seem like there's really much to say about it, we'll move on from that news story.
Next story.
Yeah, next story. This one has definitely got more to talk about. Ubuntu's next major LTS long-term support release for those in the audience named Billy and anyone else that doesn't know what an LTS is.
I figured that much.
Yeah. The LTS, would you stop moving your mic? You sound fine. When you move it, you make noise.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to make it where it don't feel so awkward.
Yeah, anyway, Ubuntu 2004 release date has been set, and planned features for a 2004 has come out here. So Focal Fossa, oh, man, these people always come with the most crazy code names.
I'm just wondering where they come up with the names.
They've got a naming convention for it.
So the names have absolutely nothing to do with whatever the program thing does.
It's just the name for the next thing.
Okay, get on to when the date is.
Yeah. So, anyways, the next release date for Ubuntu, the next major release, the next major LTS release, and the next Ubuntu release in general, 2004 will be released on April 23rd of next year. So keep your eyes out for that. Some important dates to note: our testing week is the week of January 20 of 2020. My apologies. The UI freeze is the universe freeze.
Yes, we're all going to freeze the universe.
The UI freeze, the user interface freeze. I can't talk, I tell you.
User interface.
Yeah, the user interface, the GUI, the graphic user interface freeze occurs on March 19th of next year, and the Ubuntu beta will come out on the 2nd of April of next year, with the kernel freeze on the 9th of next year of April. So April the 9th of next year will be the kernel freeze, and finally the release candidates will be released on April 16th of 2020. Again, on the 23rd of April is expected to actually release the official build. Some of the key things that are changing: they're shipping a new GNOME. Actually, it says these are things that are likely to be included. So, in theory, kernel 5.5 or newer is likely to be shipped with it. GNOME 3.36, so the GNOME desktop. And fun fact for you, Billy, some people pronounce that GNOME, and some people pronounce it GNOME.
I know it's pronounced GNOME.
Yeah.
The G is silent.
Yeah. Well, some people says the G is silent. Some people says the G is not silent.
It's like potato.
To me, it's silent.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion on the issue. Even though the developers of the project, I'm pretty sure they came out saying that they didn't want it to be silent, but I don't care. It sounds stupid.
Yeah. It's like the people call soda pop and pop soda.
Yeah,
it's just people's way of saying it.
Yeah, it's just people's way of saying it. Exactly. Anyway, multi-monitor support for the GNOME. I started to say the GNOME desktop manager has been added, which is great because that's great. As someone that uses multiple monitors, I'm happy to see that. So it's something that actually applies to me. Fractional scaling and Xorg sessions is being likely to be put in there. Gaming-related improvements as expected. And better GNOME shell performance. Yada, 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 yada. Better performance, better environment.
I got a question. Are we sure that the beta release thing isn't a late April Fool's joke?
No.
Okay. Because it's the 2nd. It's after April Fool's.
Nope.
I had to throw that in because it sounded...
No, they do this in April of every 2 years. It's the timing is all normal.
Well, I wouldn't know that.
Yeah. So, but you do now. Also, I forgot to mention new wallpapers for those that may care. So, Billy, what do you think about this release coming up?
Sounds interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean,
especially the gaming related improvements.
Yeah, I mean, these are in theory likely to be included, not necessarily guaranteed. But, look, I like Ubuntu. I run pretty close to stock Ubuntu on my system. I basically just take away their customizations to GNOME and just run it pretty much stock. But that's about it. Change some of the theming stuff, that kind of thing. So, for me, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they ship the new GNOME. The other big thing is the GNOME desktop or display manager, the GDM, the desktop display manager. The desktop display manager. I can't talk, people. The display manager.
There you go.
Yeah, is going to have multi-monitor support. I mean, I guess that's good. I mean, we don't have it now, and I use multiple monitors, and I'm not complaining. So I don't really think maybe when this will come out, I'll be like, oh, I now understand what I was missing. But I just, what am I going to be able to do? Log in from either monitor? I mean, I can't do that now. I guess that would be nice. Right now, it always has to be on one monitor, and I have to bring the mouse over to that monitor, or just tab into it or whatever with the keys. Which it really never seemed to be a problem to me. But
it sounds like a very important feature for you.
I mean,
it's important.
I mean, it would be nice to have, I guess, that it would be on both monitors, which, I guess that's what they're even talking about. I don't know if that's even what they're talking about, but, the login, the display manager, that's what it does. It manages login. So, why... that's the only thing I can think of that they would need to, quote, improve. Because, it displays the background on both now. And so the only differences would be displaying the login prompt on both.
Yeah.
Hey, that's nice.
I guess it gives you a choice of which one to
log in on, yeah. I don't think it's a bad thing or anything. It's just... I don't know.
They probably would be annoying after a while, but it's probably something they find.
No, I don't think it'd be annoying. I'm just I don't really feel like they need to rush out and add this feature. I feel like maybe somebody out there is dying for this, but I'm over here whatever. It'd be a nice improvement, but I'm not in any hurry.
Yeah. Next story.
Yeah. So, anyways, continuing on here to this is a controversial project to some people. I don't really think it's that controversial at all. Glimpse, the fork of GIMP, the G-rated fork, has issued its first release, and I don't really see the. I gotta say, I mean, the reason that some people felt the need to fork GIMP and to make Glimpse was GIMP could imply. I think it's like in German or something, or maybe it's in English too, that it's basically like a word for someone that has a limp and everything, and it could be seen as, inappropriate and everything. But that's not what it stands for. It stands for the GNU Image Manipulation Program. It has nothing to do with people's crippled legs or anything. So
doesn't sound like it to me.
I don't really see the issue, but at the same time, I don't really see the issue of having a fork or a name change that would be a little more appropriate. Like the Commodore VIC-20 was called something else in, what was it? I think it was Germany, actually, because VIC over there was a swear word, and they didn't want their product to be called a swear word. So, I mean, look, the Linux community, we in the open source community, we've named stuff bad. Some of it's, we need to try to be careful when we name stuff so it doesn't offend anybody. We don't want to tick anybody off not to use the software we're making,
Yeah.
But
make everything word neutral.
Yeah, make everything friendly to third parties, and keep politics and everything out of it. There's no need for any of that.
No political correctness.
Well, just no politics at all. Let's keep it out of it. Like, be a polite human being and keep politics out of it.
Keep the politics to politics. Keep the computer stuff to the computer stuff.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, those have very much blended together over the years now.
Yeah, everything has.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, what do you think about this? I don't think you've ever used either GIMP or Glimpse, to my knowledge.
Well, this is my first glimpse at it.
So, very, very funny. So,
yeah, but I've never used any of them. I've never used any kind of like imaging thing.
It's basically a Photoshop clone, pretty much. It does the same thing as that.
I've used Photoshop, but I've never used this.
Yeah. Well, basically it's the open source, a free equivalent, if you will. They're pretty similar. I've used both, and
Which would you prefer, though?
Well, I prefer the open source one, but that's just philosophy and the fact it's on Linux. I mean, Photoshop's not a bad program. Anyway, but do you know what a fork is? Because I said this was a fork of GIMP, but I guess you're being new to Linux and open source. You probably don't know what a fork is.
The only thing I can think of for a fork is this thing you used to eat.
It's not a...
I know it ain't that guy, but that's the only thing I can think of.
It's not an eating utensil.
I know it ain't, but
I'm just telling that for anybody out there that thinks it is. Because there could be other new users of open source software here.
What is it in accordance to Linux?
And open source software in general. What a fork is, so you know how that source code makes up a program, and the whole point of open source is that source is freely available for anyone to use as they see fit. Well, here's the thing. When you take somebody else's source and you modify it, but the project wouldn't, you're making changes to the project to the point the product wouldn't take it for whatever reason. Name change, a lot of features they just didn't want, whatever it is, you can do what's called a fork, where you basically make your version of that program, you rename it, and what ends up happening is you fork it. And by fork it, I mean you basically just take the code, you open source it again under a different name, and you basically are making changes to it. So if you will, it's just the competitor to GIMP now.
So a fork is like a fork in the road where one thing goes one way and another side goes another way.
That's one way, I guess you could say, to describe it. Yeah. So
the product that you originally took it from goes one direction, you take it to another direction using the same program.
Yeah.
Same software.
Exactly. So I mean, you get the general gist of it.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting. We're gonna have to see how this plays out, but I have mixed opinions. I feel like that GIMP should just become Glimpse at this point because, like, here's the thing. It's the same code base. Let's just change the name so that way it won't offend anybody. Let's just, I get it that that's not what that GIMP stands for. But the reality of it is you got to look at it from a marketing standpoint, right?
Yeah.
People that are coming to Linux, people that are coming to open source software, they've only heard that word in a bad context. And obviously we don't want them to associate anything bad with open source, right? We are trying to get people into the community, not out of it.
Yeah.
So
you want them to come in and welcome them.
Yeah, we want our names to be very welcoming. And not everyone knows that GIMP stands for the GNU Image Manipulation Program, right? Not everyone knows that. I didn't always know that. I didn't know it was something for a crippled person until recently either, though. But if I had known that, I would have probably had a different view of the project, not knowing that going in that that's what the letter stood for. So we need to think about this, I think, in open source when we're naming things.
Yeah.
We need to think of something that people can pronounce. We need to think of names that are going to just be easy to market and not be something that might be a turnoff to some people, because we want in open source everybody to be able to use open source and feel comfortable in open source,
or at least choose a better name that the anagrams out to a better name.
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue is
the anagram. What the letters simplify to.
I mean, look, here's the thing: the issue with Linux naming. There's so many. You've got the Mate desktop that everyone thinks is pronounced mate, right? Like, here's the thing. It's named after this drink from, I believe, Africa, if I remember right. Or no, it's South America, not Africa. My apologies. And I know that. People in the Linux community know that. But
I've heard of it and I know that.
But come on. How many people that are not in the Linux community have heard of that? Like, we got to think about this stuff, people, when we're naming stuff, okay? I get it. We want to be cool and name stuff cool stuff, right? We want to name it after some cool drink or whatever. But the problem is that when we name it something no one's ever heard of and no one knows how to pronounce, it's a marketing problem. And we already have enough marketing issues in the Linux community as it is, trying to get people's attention. The last thing we need to do is have to spend 2 hours explaining why it's not pronounced mate. Come on.
They should put some type of emphasis on the E.
I mean, we need to just make it to where a normal human being can walk off the street, if you will, and understand it. And I mean, obviously, we can't eliminate every possible name issue and everything perfectly, but I think we need to at least work on it. I mean, like the GNOME desktop. You would probably walk off the street think it's GNOME. And again, according to the developers, now it is. But used to, they said it was GNOME with the G being silent. And, this topsy-turviness and all these issues is just causing issues for open source and Linux. And again, I don't want to make anybody mad, As a supporter of open source software, the whole point is freedom. If you want to call your project a name that's, hard to pronounce or something that maybe people don't understand, you are 120% welcome to do so.
But at least just explain to the people.
But by doing so, you should realize going in, look, this project may not get as much attention as it deserves because this name is going to probably cause us issues in the marketing. And maybe it won't. You never know. I mean, I'm not saying I have all the answers. All I'm saying is I think that it's something we need to think about because, again, like Mate, the GNOME desktop, things like this, the naming issues, when I talk to non-Linux users, I have to explain to them what Mate is and all this, and they don't understand that, and it's unnecessary friction in my book to trying to get new users on Linux. Again, there's nothing wrong with the name. In fact, I actually like those names, but it's just we need to work on being able to make the environment to where that a new user is more likely to come in. We want to attract new users as much as possible.
There's more clarification on it from the developers and stuff like that on what the name is and means.
I mean, here's the thing. To me, if you have to clarify what the name means, you've already messed up in the naming. The name should be so self-explanatory that you just know how to pronounce it in normal English, and you don't have to be told, no, it's not pronounced mate, it's pronounced Mate. Yeah. You shouldn't. If your name is so hard to deal with in English, and I mean, I get it that if you are in South America, that name probably you would know automatically out of the box to pronounce it. So I am aware that this is a North American and the rest of the world centric view. But mind you, in the open source world, we're everywhere. So you need to be thinking about that when you name stuff. Okay, if the name is not going to work in any continent but South America, maybe rethink the name because there's a lot of continents other than South America that's using your software. So I'm just saying, think about that.
Next story.
But anyway, continuing on, Audacity 2.3.3 has been released with major bug fixes and has removed old features that have been deemed obsolete. Among other things that has changed, they have fixed over 75 bugs, and those bugs include fixing the quality slider now works with AAC and MP4A exports. Did not know it didn't. But I normally just use waves in Audacity, so that's probably why. Or MP3s. Leading blank spaces is treated as silent on export. Exports are now based on what you hear is what you get. I'm not really clear on what that last part is.
It makes no sense.
I guess that just means that they were doing some kind of processing of the audio when they export it. They're not now, maybe? I don't know.
Or it could have been something like if it's like what you like recorded with it, something like that. It doesn't actually help edit it to fix it. It just is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really use Audacity very much, so that probably is not helping me here. Additionally, there's some of the other effects. They say it's going to be faster now. The repair effect, the what is that? Pulse stretch
and reverb.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what pulse stretch is, but I've heard of reverb and repair. But those effects will now be faster on Linux systems. Attempting to time shift multiple tracks will no longer result in a crash, which is nice. While strange noises are inserted during pitch and roll re-recording has also been solved. So those are nice. Among some things that have been removed in the next version of the app, or this version of the app, I should say, include the following, because they have new, better alternatives. Nyquist Bench, Workbench, Vocal remover effect has been replaced. Normalizer on load. I did not even know it did that. Meaning that normalizes all the levels so they're about where they're supposed to be. On-demand loading of aliased files such as WAV and AIFF files. So again, right now it's available for download for Mac and Windows and Linux machines. Again, Audacity 2.3.3. Billy, I don't really think you ever edit audio to my knowledge, based on what I've heard. But does it sound like a good update to you?
In a way, yeah. If you're like for audio and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's most interesting is the fact that they've got so many updates. Or not updates, but bug fixes they put in there. That's a lot of bugs to have to fix. And so it's good to hear that for a quality standpoint that they've fixed a lot of bugs. And that's really good to hear that we're having a lot of bug control. Another big story, especially for the gamers here. We talked about gaming last week too. Yeah. This has been the gaming podcast for Linux here the last 2 weeks here. I don't even like gaming that much at all, so that's the funny part about it. But hey, it's in the news. We cover it.
The audacity of you, man.
I'm just saying, if you exclude like Minecraft and Super Tux, that's about all I play. And even those I don't play much.
Minecraft is good.
It is. Super Tux is also good. But Stadia, the game streaming service from Google, is something that can work on Ubuntu. So you can now stream your games in real time over the internet if your internet connection is good enough, and it will work on Ubuntu. Well, at least partially. So there is some caveats to it. It will not really work very well out of the box because right now when you use Google Chrome on Ubuntu, and I did not know this by the way until today, or when I read this, actually it was last night when I was putting this together, but it does not support hardware acceleration for graphics, which I gotta say is kind of a surprise. I mean, I figured it would, but apparently not, which is a glaring omission, obviously, that it doesn't support that. But there is workarounds, as naturally there would be in an open source environment. And so you can use the Chromium Snap app. There's a version of that available where it has the VAPI, right? If you have, I think that's for NVIDIA devices. And that right there, when that patch is applied using Snap, will do wonders from the article we're reading here for the performance of Stadia. I can't really relate because, again, I don't really use it. And then it goes on here to say different things about it. But it seems to me like that. That it worked pretty good on Linux. And what we're seeing in the article here, a quote in the article says, "Quote: I logged into my Google account and launched Destiny 2. My computer CPUs were not at 100% like before, more like 30%, and the game was actually playable with barely noticeable lags. So it sounds to me like that it's a much better experience if you actually have those graphics drivers there, which makes sense. Yeah. Or the graphics acceleration, I should say. And it sounds to me like that you could be playing some games on Linux that way, and that's great because then you don't have to even install them to play them.
It also makes it sound like that you can play it on like low-end computers as well. You don't need like one of those fancy high-end.
Yeah, I mean, game streaming would allow, in theory, for lower-end machines to be able to play games, which I think is going to be interesting because some Linux machines are lower spec systems. You know, it's a cheap system they got off eBay. It's the old machine they have in the corner that they just use to read the news or whatever. So it'd be nice if people could game on that if they want to.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it would work for an old Apple One.
Yeah, Linux.
That'd be way too far back.
Linux doesn't even support the Apple one, so that would
I'm
probably
talking like
be
the original old computers, like the old boxy.
Yeah. So this is my favorite story of the week, folks, right here.
Ooh, this actually sounds
because
interesting.
this is bragging rights for us in the Linux community, and
I just like it because it has to do with the supercomputer.
Well, anyways, so I'll tell you a little secret, Billy. Out of the top 500 supercomputers, the last time I checked, they were all running Linux. So yeah, think about that one for a minute. That we own that market.
It's going to be HAL 3000 all over again.
Yeah, but anyways, the world's fastest supercomputers have hit higher speeds than ever before with Linux. Now, I mean, is anyone really surprised? Linux is very efficient.
Just wait till they come out with quantum computers. And add Linux to it.
I'm pretty sure that you can run Linux on quantum computers right now. I think IBM has a distro that you can run on quantum computers right now. Pretty sure.
I don't think they have quantum computers out yet.
Yeah, they do. They
quantum
exist.
Supercomputer.
They exist, but they're just extremely expensive to run. They're really only in labs, but they do exist from a standpoint of existence. But anyway,
that's news to me.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so this is interesting. And as you just pointed out, it's almost like you're reading the article. You probably were. It says, yes, there's a lot of talk about how quantum computers can do jobs in 200 seconds that would take the world's fastest supercomputers 10,000 years.
Told you quantum computers are faster.
Of course they're faster. I already knew this as well. This is literally a known fact.
I know, that's what makes them awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, but I think it will be interesting to see. But the simple truth is that most jobs, supercomputers are faster than anything else on the planet right now, for the most part. And I mean, the thing is, these supercomputers are very powerful as it is. I mean, I don't really deal with this kind of stuff because, I mean, I've never really dealt with it. But I think it's interesting from a pure standpoint of, look, it's bragging rights, right? Look how efficient we are. We've made the most powerful computers in the world that are not quantum computers, that is, specifically, run even faster than they already did with optimizations. That seems like a pretty good thing to be able to brag about. I'm just saying. So
just combine the two and imagine how fast it would be.
I'm just saying, kernel developers and anyone else involved in making that happen, thank you so much for giving us something to brag about.
Yes, let's give a hand to all of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is wonderful. Anyway, so let's talk about, well, before we go on, do you have anything you would like to say about that here?
Nothing I can think of, only that about supercomputers and stuff like that, I've always been interested in them, and I find that interesting.
I see. Well, let's talk about our topic for today's episode, Linux Mint, and your thoughts on it. So we got the Linux Mint website up here in front of us, and I'm going to just take you through a little bit of the screenshots and stuff here. But this is the Cinnamon desktop. This is the one that looks like Windows, which is one of the things that you said you would like about it. Look at the little taskbar at the bottom there. In Linux, we call that a panel, not a taskbar, but it looks like a taskbar.
Yeah.
It is styled like a taskbar, and I believe one of these screenshots here has the menu. That's the installer. That's the login screen. And there's the file browser. Again, looks kind of like the Windows one. You can follow it. They've got the background editor. And I'm going to go, there we are. Look at that. That's their start menu. Doesn't that kind of look like the Windows start menu?
Yeah.
So I like it. You got the categories on the side here, and you can actually dock specific programs right here in this very edge bar here so that you can install stuff. These are actually screenshots that are a little old. The latest Cinnamon looks a little different than this, but the functionality is the same.
Yeah.
It's just a newer, more refreshed look. They did actually change a little bit out of the panels and stuff, but you can revert it to the classic mode where it acts just like this if you want. I'm actually curious. I'm actually curious on whether you would like the classic or the modern one, because some people in the Linux community don't like the modern one and some people do. I like the modern one myself, but the classic is fine too. I mean, they both work.
Good like that.
I mean, I like the modern one better, and I also like the new dark themes they've got under Linux Mint now. That under Cinnamon and stuff, it's beautiful dark themes. I got to tell you,
they are.
So you haven't even seen them yet, Billy.
I use dark themes all the time.
You just love dark themes. You're like, I have not even seen it yet, but I'll endorse this because it's dark themed. That right there has to be good in my book, right? That's pretty much what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell me, what do you think?
It looks interesting. It looks cool.
Yeah. So as someone that's messed around with Linux Mint for a while, what's your thoughts on it? Is there any questions you'd like to ask me about it? Any thoughts that you'd like to throw out there about it?
Well, I've already asked last time some of the questions of things that would work on it, and you answered those.
Yeah, so they have a software store in there. So one of the common misconceptions in the non-Linux world about Linux is that you have to open up that command line, you have to open up that terminal to install anything and to get anything done. And that is farther from the truth than I've ever seen in my life, especially in some distributions of Linux. Linux Mint, for example, you can run a Linux Mint system and almost never have to open that terminal up. Yeah. So you can, if you want a Linux experience without having to open the terminal up very much, Linux Mint is a great choice for something like that, which is one of the reasons it's good for new users, because you can update the system, install apps, everything, all from a GUI, and you don't ever have to open that terminal up for the most part. That being said, the terminal is really a good part of Linux. It gives you a lot of control, and I find myself, knowing the terminal, I can install something from the terminal way faster than I can from opening the GUI up. By the time you got the GUI open, I can already have the thing downloading. It's like, it's way faster to type sudo apt install space package name and hit, it's like, you want to install this, press Y and hit enter, voila, it's installed, like walk away. That's way faster than having to go click on menu, find software installer, go into search in software installer, search for application, click on application, view application details, click on install button, be prompted for password, enter password, walk away. Which one of those is faster, you think?
I think I'll probably have to have your help with figuring out how to use the command line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the command line, you can learn it over time. The nice thing about Linux is you don't have to jump into it at one time completely, You don't have to use the command line. There are some Linux users that will barely ever touch the command line, and that's fine. And in the early days of Linux, I was not really one of those users because I started on the server side, and that's all really command line. So I'm not a good example of what used to be a new user. But
it's more used for like adding programs and stuff like that, make it a lot easier to do.
Here's the thing: you can use the command line Linux to do anything, pretty much. And there is some people that use Linux, especially like in a server environment, where it's just a terminal. That's it. There's like, for example, if you download like Ubuntu Server, which is a Linux distribution design, it's basically just Ubuntu without the desktop and to optimize for server usage. Yeah. And here's the thing. When you install that, you're going to boot that thing up after the install, and you're going to see a blinking cursor that says log in. And that is what you've got. And you can access it over the network and log in and do, your remote shell and type in your command line, or your terminal, as we call it in Linux, or you can do that locally on the machine using what's called a TTY. And a TTY, Billy, I know you're not going to know what this is. I'm sorry if you do, but I just seriously doubt it. A TTY is a teletype.
I kind of figured that.
Yeah, and so back in the old days, you've seen like old documentaries about like computers and stuff, and that's got this big mainframe computer, and all these machines, these dumb terminals are sitting there, and you're connecting to it and stuff, right? And it's the computer's processing and everything. Linux is actually heavily inspired by Unix, and Unix was the system that was used in a lot of those mainframes to be able to connect to all those terminals and stuff. So because of that, we have a lot of that legacy built in. Yeah. So
it's based on like the first computer program system and stuff like that they originally used.
Basically, the issue here that I'm trying to explain to you, Billy, I don't know if it was the very first, but Unix is very old. Yeah. But, it's way older than us. Let's put it that way. It's one of the
predecessors to modern programs and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's an operating system, not a program.
That's what I meant by program.
Well, I mean, it is a program. An operating system is a program, but
that's what I meant by program.
It's a program that lets you run other programs, pretty much.
The operating system, I'll say that then program.
But here's the thing: the thing is, because that Unix had terminals and everything, Linux has terminals, and you can actually go into a full screen teletype on a modern machine. I mean, you don't have like the remote teletype and the keyboard and everything, even though I bet you could hook that up somehow. Yeah. But I'll tell you right now, Billy, stop tapping on the table. You're putting audio in them, and you are really bad at podcasts, buddy. Anyway, but here's the thing. The thing about it is that you can still pull one of those teletypes up today, on a Linux machine, actually locally. And that's what it does. It just dumps you into a TTY, a teletype, right? A virtualized teletype when that you have a server, or it doesn't have to be a server. It could be a desktop that just doesn't have a GUI installed, because that's what happens if you don't have a GUI installed. And so basically, long story short, if you're installing a server, that's what you get. So I don't want to say there isn't Linux distros like Ubuntu Server where you're going to be using the command line. You are. And honestly, if you're doing any server administration in Linux, you're going to be doing command line. And if you're doing administration of a lot of systems, you're going to be doing command line, because or terminal, whatever you want to call it. Because and terminal is the correct name, but I'm calling it command line sometimes because Windows users and stuff will call it that, and I'm trying to use words that are familiar to them. Not to mention, it just makes sense in my head to call it that because I used Windows for so many years, so that's part of it. But the thing is, I mean, Linux is actually, here's the thing: Linux is actually, if you want to use Linux, like on Ubuntu, there is. Can you get away with using Ubuntu without a terminal? Yes, but I think it's not as much to the point as you can with Linux Mint. Like Linux Mint is much less terminal heavy. Pretty much everything can be done in a GUI environment in Linux Mint. But that being said, the beautiful thing about Linux is, you can automate anything you want in a terminal, first of all. Yeah. That's one of the best parts about it. So the thing is, you can do updating in a terminal. You can install apps in a terminal. And Linux Mint, not just in other OS, in other Linux distros. And the thing is, at the end of the day, it just comes down to what the user's used to and what they want for the experience. Not everyone wants to open the terminal, and that's fine. And if you want to open the terminal, it's there. You can open it up, and you can run your commands. And if you're somebody like me, and a lot of Linux users, I gather, are a lot like me, where we kind of go back and forth. We do command line here, we do GUI there, based on what's going on. So, you can do that in Linux Mint. So,
I do have one question, though.
What's that?
If I do switch it over from Windows to Linux, will it erase anything on my computer when it switches over?
Yeah, that's generally how an operating system works. So, yeah, the thing about when you install
save files and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. When you install another operating system, you're going to, you're going to erase everything on the drive. So what you need to do, you need to back up all your data to like a cloud host or something, an external hard drive, and then when you install Linux, you can drag it all back over into what's called your home folder, which is another thing we haven't talked about, but this I think is very informative for new users to know, as well as you, because you are a new user, or hopefully a new user.
I got an SD card I can switch it all over to.
In Linux, the file system in Linux is heavily, again, similar to the Unix file system. And the thing is, there's the concept of what's called a home directory. Every user on a Linux or Unix system has a home directory. And that's where you store all your files. So basically, like, let's say, for example, in Linux, your home directory would be /home/your username. So, for example, my username on my Linux systems is Vincent Maggard. So, my home directory would be /home/Vincent Maggard/. And that's where all my files, whether that's video, audio, I'm a software developer, my code is there, whatever it is, that's where all your code goes. Your documents is under that folder, your music folder, everything is under that folder.
So, if I want to keep anything that's on the computer, switch over to something that's external.
You basically just need to drag everything into your home directory, and that's what's going to populate. That's the folder that's going to automatically open /home/your username. When you open up a file manager, that's what's going to open up. So that's why you want to drag all your files in there. Plus, that's for your part of the system. It's got permissions and everything correct. And so there, you can put your music in your music folder, your documents in your documents. You don't have to do it that way. I mean, they're just folders. You can put whatever you want in there. But the point is, it's pretty similar, from a Windows system in that sense.
Yeah, but before I switch over, I have to take everything that's on the computer that I want to keep and stuff, move it to something external.
You need to take all your data, and you need to take that, and you need to back it up somewhere else on a drive or something. As far as programs go, you don't use Wine. It's a security risk under Linux. If you can avoid it at all costs, do. Wine is not an emulator. That's a thing you can let you run some Windows apps under Linux and tries to do the translation. But then you can run Windows viruses under Linux too. So you don't want that. So let's not do that. Let's leave Wine out of the equation so we can't have a Windows virus try to attack our systems successfully.
I'll try to find a Linux equivalent to the programs I use.
That's generally what I would recommend. And these days, we were talking about this last week. Comic book readers, you can find them on Linux, so you can find equivalents of that. There's video editors on Linux, audio editors on Linux. All the major web browsers pretty much are on Linux these days. I think Safari would really be the only one that wouldn't. Even Edge is going to come to Linux. So
there are some things I found that do go on Linux, though.
Yeah. So, I mean, but, the thing is, for you, based on what we gathered from last week's episode and talking to you in general, it seems like you use a lot of web-based stuff, and there's really not that much desktop-specific apps that are actually separate apps that you run. So I think for you, it's going to be really easy for you to move to Linux, because if everything you use in a web browser, I'll tell you a little secret, it's not going to be any different when you move to Linux. You're just going to bring your logins over to everything to Linux, go into the web browser after you install it, and just log into everything, and it will be the same experience as before. So,
as long as I can get to my YouTube, I'm happy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can watch YouTube on Linux. Like I said last week, I really care about that. So,
as long as I get to my YouTube, my reading, and the games,
exactly,
I'm happy.
Exactly. So, as far as I'm concerned, it seems to me like that you are, I think you're about ready to move, honestly.
Yeah.
I think, next week, bring your computer over, we'll back it up and, let's make the move,
Yep. I'll probably have all my things backed up before then.
Yeah, exactly. That's even better.
I got an SD card that has a lot of space on it.
But here's the question. Do you want Mate, Linux Mint Mate, or Linux Mint Cinnamon, or Linux Mint XFCE, which they don't even have here? Because they all look kind of similar. They style those three desktops to look, those two other desktops to look a lot like Cinnamon. To me, I think that you should use Cinnamon because this is called the desktop environment. Another concept in Linux is a desktop environment. So see, in Windows, there's one desktop environment. Yeah. That's what you get. But in Linux, you can have any desktop environment you want. And Cinnamon is the desktop environment. GNOME's the desktop environment. This controls what you see when you're logged in. So if you want a Windows-like experience, Cinnamon will give you that. And as we talked about last week, you seem to want that. Now, Mate, they've styled it to act like Windows a lot, and XFCE the same thing. Yeah. I think, personally, for you, considering you don't really have a bias, because you haven't used it before, Cinnamon is, the main desktop on Linux. They develop it, Linux Mint. They develop it, the Linux Mint people themselves. I think for you, it looks like Windows. You're going to be familiar with the UI. I think for you, it's the best choice. Use Cinnamon. Cool. But it's your system. You should have the right to choose, and we're all about that in the Linux world.
I'll go with your suggestion.
Okay,
pretty good. It looks pretty easy to.
All right, so you want to go with Cinnamon and give it a try.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is, with Linux, you can always change to another desktop if you don't like it at some point. I've moved desktop environments around over the years many times, so you don't have to stick with it. And the other thing too is, if you're like me and you have 5 or 6 Linux machines, you can have multiple desktop environments, on different machines. You can even have multiple desktop environments on one machine, even though I find that a lot of times that can cause stability issues. Yeah. So really probably better to pick a desktop environment, Anyway, but at the end of the day, Linux Mint, I think for you is going to be your best bet. Yeah. I think it's going to be something that's going to work good for you. You can install Chrome on it. You can install Spotify, Steam, pretty much everything you might want. Your comic book reader, everything you're going to probably need is going to be available on Linux Mint because it's based on Ubuntu. So you've got all that Ubuntu software available to you. And Ubuntu is one of the largest Linux distros out there. So you're going to have, if it's made for Linux, they usually have an Ubuntu build out there. So you're going to be able to run pretty much anything available for Linux on that machine in theory. In practice, maybe not, but in theory at least. Yeah. So, I think you're going to really like it. I hope so. Check out the progress of Billy's move on our YouTube channel. You can check out our YouTube channel by going to opensourcetonight.com and check us out there. You can find show notes and more there. And so Billy, any final thoughts here about your move here?
Not really. I just think it'd be pretty easy, interesting to do.
Yeah.
Because from what I've seen of the screenshots of it, it looks real easy to navigate.
Nice. Well, I think after we end the show here in a few minutes, I'll show you a little bit of Linux Mint. I've actually got it on the system here, and I'll let you play with it. And, that way you can kind of get your feet wet before you install it on your system, just to be sure that you won't be that far out of water. But, folks, you've been listening to Open Source Tonight, and this is Vincent here and my co-host Billy here. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in this week. Billy, where can they find you online?
They can find me on Facebook under my name.
Alrighty, sounds good, Billy. Well, you can find me at vincentmaggard.com, vincentmaggard.dev, and youtube.com/vincentmaggard. And you've been listening to Open Source Tonight. Until next week, thanks for listening.